So Zen release noting is really a combination of Zen noting and progressive release, that kind of basic movement of taking more form and then letting go of form, dropping structure, dropping form. And Zen noting as freely functioning is it's connected to Diane Musho Hamilton, and Genpo Roshi, two Zen teachers that I've mentioned here before, who really influenced my understanding of social practice. And they really were a direct influence on the practice of Zen noting, their big mind process, voice dialogue. And in that model, they often present what they call the triangle. And in the triangle, if you imagine, just visualize a triangle. On the left side of the base of the triangle, you have what we could call the personal identity, or the ego. And within the personal identity, the way we could conceive of this in this model is it's a parts theory. We're looking at the self as a collection of parts. And that within the personal domain, there are many different aspects of the self. In that voice dialogue work that comes from Hal and Sidra Stone, they talk about some kind of key voices of the ego, like the controller, the protector, the wounded child, things like this. It could also be other things like judgment. Really, you can think of anything that's part of you, and if it feels like yours, or it's like you, that's probably a personal identity voice. And then on the other side of the triangle, we have the transcendent voices. We have the voices that go beyond the self. Voices like big mind, or awareness, or being, big heart. These are different words, descriptions of the transcendent voices that obviously go beyond the ego in some way. What's interesting is that going beyond the ego isn't enough. For me, I don't teach that way. Like, okay, the goal here is we're going to transcend our egos, and then everything will be good. Because I know that's not true. That's a fairy tale. And it is a fairy tale concocted by our own egos and the egos of others. This idea of permanent stability and okayness. Who wants that? I do. Okay. Yeah. Welcome, ego. Welcome, self. Of course you do. I understand that. Who doesn't? But the transcendent voices give us a break. They give us a peek into what it's like to be free of that sort of more contracted kind of identity that feels so much smaller and more limited than this vast, the vastness of reality that's possible. And so I think it's very common as a kind of developmental thing for people to, when they first start to remember who they are, their true nature, and catch glimpses of that in moments. In doing that, it feels like such a relief. It feels like so much freedom in contrast that when we contract back into the self view, it's like, oh my gosh, I really want to get back there. And that this must be the goal, is just to abide in this free space. But of course, here we're assuming, right, that that's possible, that we could just abide in this space and never be a self again. That's an interesting assumption, I think. And it's to me, it ultimately turns out to be false. Because of the nature of reality expands and contracts. This is the way things are. Sometimes we're expanding, we're open. Sometimes we're contracting and we're closed. Like today in our check-ins, there's more contraction, right, in this group as we enter the holidays and whatever else is going on. So that's where we are. It's contracting. So if I feel like I should be able to be free and okay and just peaceful or feeling spacious or whatever it is, my ideas of freedom, then I'm going to struggle with this. Like I'm going to suffer. And I'm not going to be able to work very skillfully with the self and my own tendencies. Whereas if I let go of big mind, let go of the universal voices, let go of even holding on to that, to freedom, then I might discover that there's another position that's possible. And this is what we could think of as the apex of the triangle. Between the personal and the universal, we have at the top the freely functioning. Here's Diane Hamilton is basically just in very simple terms describing freely functioning. She says, voices that include both the personal identity as well as the transcendent voices. Those are freely functioning. And today we'll use that particular phrase, freely functioning, to explore, but there are other names for the freely functioning voices, names such as the master or mastery, the integrated self, the unique self. These are other ways of talking about or exploring the territory of free functioning. And the idea is that by being freely functioning, we can move in and out of both the personal and the universal. We're not stuck in either. Genpo Roshi in Big Mind, Big Heart, he says, when we're not stuck in either the dual or the non-dual, we're not stuck, period. We're free to move in any direction. And for me, this is actually really the utility of this kind of practice is in bringing us to the point where we can let go of all these ideas of who we are, these limited conceptions of these absolute identities, like thinking I really am this self, and I really am. I have this grudge, and I'm really bitter, and I'm gonna, make it right. These kind of things that we hold on to that are really, in so many ways, the source of ours and others' suffering in the world. That we can sort of let go of those, and we can find respite and freedom in our fundamental nature. But we don't need to hold on to that because it's always already true. And when we realize that at a deep level, then we actually become free to move more and more, over time, free to move in and out of those different voices in a skillful way. So when is it skillful to be a self? When is it skillful to be no one? When is it, what's called for in this moment? To me, the freely functioning voice is always a response to present moment conditions. There's some sense of just seeing what's going on and responding appropriately, given whatever it is we know in our current skill sets. And of course, there's things we don't know and don't see. So we're not always perfectly skillful, of course. But I found as I've got to become more familiar with this voice, and when I notice that I'm acting out of it, usually in retrospect, because when it's happening, I'm just in it, just being it. But in retrospect, I might reflect back and go, oh, wow, yeah, that was the appropriate response. And it wasn't a big deal. I don't need to give myself a pat on the back. Or as they say in Lojong training, don't expect applause. But I can see how much more skillful it is really to be able to move in and out of these different voices. So my hope here today is that by exploring the freely functioning self, we might actually get a sense for what formless social meditation already is. Because that's what the freely functioning self does. It's just whatever's happening doesn't have to have a fixed idea about what it should look like. There's no clinging or grasping in the freely functioning self. So there's just moving and responding and taking into account what is. So I'm hopeful that by using this as a doorway, for some of us, it might illuminate what this practice of formless social meditation is.